Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Sandler, and I'm the Education Coordinator for Enfield Shaker Museum. I'd like to welcome all of you to our new virtual program, Shaker Stories, Shaker Lives. In this ongoing series, we will explore the lives and legacies of individual Enfield Shakers. In the first installment, our presenters, Carolyn Smith and Marianne Hagen, will delve into the life of Rosetta Cummings. Cummings, who came to the Shakers with her family in the late 1840s, played a pivotal role in the community as a teacher, eldress, and trustee. Let's begin by introducing our speakers. Carolyn Smith has been associated with the museum since its founding in 1986, when she served as the institution's first executive director. Since then, Carolyn has spent years collecting Shaker ephemera, with a particular emphasis on Enfield postcards and stereographs. Marianne Hagen is a longtime independent Shaker scholar whose research focuses on the Enfield, New Hampshire Shaker Society. She's been active in the work of the museum since 1987 and is the founding director of the Enfield Shaker Singers. In 2012, Marianne compiled and edited the collected writings of Henry Cummings, published by Richard Cooper Press. Collectively, Carolyn and Marianne have spent decades researching individual Enfield Shakers. Over the past 30 years, they've compiled membership data on over 1,500 individual Enfield Shakers. Central to that research has been their dedication and appreciation of the importance of biography to understanding the Shaker experience. Before we start, I would just like to remind the audience that questions can be posted using the chat function. Carolyn and Marianne will address these at the end of the presentation. Another thing I'd like to mention, if you do not like having the speaker video in the lower corner or the side corner of your screen, you can use a tiny bar. There's a tiny bar on the left that you can use to reduce that and get that out of your way if you choose. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Smith and Marianne Hagen.
Welcome, everybody. I'm sure if I could actually see your faces, I would know most of you, and I'm thrilled that you're here, and I know Marianne is as well. Just before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the decades of remarkable research and scholarship that Marianne Hagen has put into supporting Enfield Shaker Museum and just Shaker study in general. You need to know that the vast majority of what you'll hear today, we know only because of her work and generous willingness to share that work with others. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to go to a PowerPoint presentation. There we go. We're going to start by letting Rosetta set the stage for our examination of her life with the Shakers. Her handwritten autobiography appears in the final pages of her manuscript hymnal, a collection of miscellaneous songs, benedictions, valedictions, and school songs collected in the church, Enfield, New Hampshire, 1859. This handwritten hymnal is currently on loan to Enfield Shaker Museum from Shaker Museum, Mount Lebanon, and part of an exhibit that we have on Rosetta Cummings. Quote, Rosetta Cummings, born in the town of Hebron, county of Grafton, and state of New Hampshire, December 21st, 1841. My father, mother, 3 brothers, namely John T., Henry, and Enoch P. Cummings, ages 13, 10, and 8 years old, also a sister, Anne, 8 months old, moved to and united with the Shakers at the North family, Enfield, New Hampshire, in October 1843. April 15th, 1844. Being 3 years old and some months, my father carried me to the church family, and I was admitted as a child to the care of the church family, was cared for and taught, sick or well, and schooled, leaving school at the age of 16 years. When 18 years old, began to teach a primary department at Second Family. Taught 4 terms of summer school there, girls only. Taught in church family 2 terms, winter school, boys only, and 2 terms summer school, girls only, making 8 terms of school in all. In 1866, went to infirmary, 25 years of age. September 1869, moved to office, and in 1870 went to North family as associate eldress with Eldress Laura Foster. October 1877, removed to office at Church family. September 1878, removed from office to associate eldress with Eldress Caroline Witcher, 37 years of age. July 1879, Eldress Caroline released to succeed Sister Mary Falls as managing businesswoman. For the sisters in the office, and I am appointed to succeed her as the eldest of the family. In April 1902, after these many years of faithful service, she goes to her reward, and I am appointed to succeed her in the trusteeship at office. In November 1923, moved from Enfield to East Canterbury, New Hampshire, being 82 years of age the following December. End quote. In true Rosetta fashion, the description of her life is short and with little indication of the important role she played in the history of the Enfield Shaker community. Let's take a quick look at Rosetta's parents and siblings. Although each of their lives is rich enough for its own presentation, we will leave them for another time. We're going to start with her father, Edward Taylor Cummings. He was a religious enthusiast who had experimented with several different denominations by the time he brought his wife and 5 children to the North family of the Enfield Shakers in October of 1844. His enthusiasm for a Shaker life, however, lasted only 3 years. Mary McGrath Cummings, his wife, came to the Shakers against her will. She remained in the North family only 6 months before she left her husband and 5 children and moved to a nearby town. After leaving the Shakers, she wrote testimony critical of the Shakers that was published in one of Mary Dyer's books, and she testified against the Shaker community again during the 1848 legislative hearings. John Taylor Cummings was the eldest son of Edward and Mary. He was born in 1829 in Groton, New Hampshire. From a very early age, John showed a great interest in mathematics, history, and anything mechanical. He came to the Shakers at the age of 15 and remained here his whole life. He's the only Cummings family member to be buried in the Church Family Shaker Cemetery in Enfield. Henry Cummings was born in June 1834 and joined the Shakers with his family at the age of 10. Henry was extremely intelligent and personable with obvious leadership ability. In fact, for many years, Henry was the public face of Shakerism at Enfield and the elder of the North family. But in 1881, he stunned the society by apostatizing and marrying Shaker sister Arabella Churchill. He eventually settled in the town of Enfield and reestablished relations with his family and the Shakers. Before we leave Henry, I'd like to address the spelling of the last name. You may notice that the parents and the 3 siblings all use 2 M's in their last name, where Henry only has 1, and that's not a typo. The Cummings family name appears in various Shaker and public recordings with both double M's and single M's. After his apostasy, however, Henry consistently used Cummings with 1 M, and his Shaker siblings used Cummings with 2 M's. So for more than 30 years, Marianne and I have puzzled over the spelling of Cummings, and we have finally concluded that this is the way for us to look at it. Enoch Page Cummings, born in September 1837, was the youngest Cummings family boy. He was 8 years old when the family joined the Shakers. As a young man, he apparently showed interest in medicine and medicinal gardening. And in 1860, he went to Canterbury to learn dentistry. His rudimentary dentistry skills and his experience as a medicinal gardener served Enoch well when he decided to leave the Shakers in October of 1863. By 1867, Enoch had moved to Grand Haven, Michigan with his wife, Juliet Walker, a Shaker sister from the 2nd family here, and went into private practice. The youngest Cummings child, Anne, was only 8 months old when she came to Enfield with her family and placed in the children's order. She lived her whole life in the Shaker community. Like her brother Henry and her sister Rosetta before her, as an adult, she had responsibility for nurturing the small family of persons who were trying out a Shaker life in the North family. Anne went with the first group of sisters to Canterbury in 1917 and lived there until her death in 1927. She was a poet and songwriter, as well as a faithful sister who neither sought nor gained a public persona. She's buried at Canterbury Shaker Village in Canterbury, New Hampshire. Oops, sorry. In 1897, Enoch and his wife Juliet spent the summer vacationing on the Cape. In August, they came to Enfield and spent 3 weeks visiting the family he had left behind 30 years before. They stayed with Henry and Arabella in North Enfield and with his Shaker siblings, Rosetta, Anne, and John at Enfield Shaker Village. Colonel Frank Churchill took a family picture during this visit. It was the last time the family would be together, and the only image that we know of Enoch, Juliet, and Juliet, who had left so many years before. Now I'd like to turn the program over to Marianne, who will talk with you about Rosetta's early years.
As is the case with most children taken into Enfield's Shaker community, we have only a general impression of Rosetta's childhood. We can assume, though, that being separated from her heartbroken mother when she was not quite 4 years old was a traumatic event in this young child's life. Certainly, she needed someone who was emotionally open and available to fill the void that her father's decisions had created. Fortunately, Rosetta found such a person in Charlotte Hart, the sister in charge of the girls. When the New Lebanon ministry visited Enfield in 1850, they wrote, quote, "First visited the physician's establishment, and finally we went to see the girls with their goodly shepherdess, who evidently gathered and rules her little flock by the powerful principle of love. It was evident that she loved her dear little flock and that they loved her most dearly. Charlotte Hart has a beautiful gift to train up children in the way they should go. And she and her 14 little innocent girls enjoy a little heaven on earth." End quote. Even if their assessment of the children's order was overly exuberant, it seems that Rosetta was emotionally nurtured in the children's order and well-educated in the Shaker school. In addition to formal classroom instruction, she worked alongside Shaker sisters who imparted their knowledge of nursing, cooking, needlework, and other domestic arts. Rosetta attended the Shaker school until she was 16. 2 years later, she was back in the classroom teaching young children, but this time at the Second or South Family of Shakers, a branch of the Enfield Society located just down the road near the head of Mascoma Lake. Her life remained centered at the church family during the years that she taught there. In 1866, she became head teacher at the church. This photo on the right is a picture of that church school. The school was located across the side road from the Great Stone Dwelling, about where the ministry building stands now. Apparently, her first term was a challenging one. The town's superintendent of schools reported, quote, "Hers was a harder task than that of her predecessor, owing to the backwardness of her scholars. A large number of them had not attended the school before. The school was unpromising enough at its commencement. But notwithstanding that, they made astonishing progress in their studies and looked much brighter and more intelligent than at my first visit." Rosetta's teachers
Marianne, you're muted. There you go.
Rosetta's teacher's register, pictured on the left, lists the textbooks available to her for instruction. Practical education was highly valued by the society, and the classroom was well appointed and well supplied. The register also records the names of visitors to the school during the term. Shaker schools were part of the town's public school system, but they received more than their share of scrutiny by a curious and oftentimes suspicious public. Many of those registered as guests, however, were community members and visiting Shakers who wished to show their support for their scholars by coming by to observe. Nonetheless, 60 visitors during a 12-week term is a lot to accommodate. In her 1866 teacher evaluation, Rosetta was praised for effectively teaching the foundational skills of reading, writing, and intellectual arithmetic, but also for expanding her curriculum to include music, penmanship, and gymnastic exercises. She kept a book of possible teaching materials, including vocal exercises, rounds, elocution exercises, potential song texts, and copies of letters related to teaching. Rosetta's own intellectual interests also led her to develop herself as a poet and a musician. 2 of her music manuscripts are currently on loan to us from the library at Shaker Museum, Mount Lebanon. Many of the songs in her hymnals were received here at Enfield, including several written by Rosetta. Her authorship is modestly indicated by the letters RC. Rosetta particularly used the gift of music to articulate her spiritual journey. The song on the left, a single line melody dated 1869, is written in Shaker literal notation. By 1876, when her hymn, The Savior Near, was published in the Shakers monthly periodical, she was also comfortable writing in 4-part harmony using standard notation. Here is her song, Oh, Let Me Go, Let My Spirit Rise. Oh, let me go, let my spirit arise to the spheres of unselfish devotion. Oh, may I know and in truth realize the power of full consecration. As the fetters which bind me to earth are unloosed, my soul sings for joy in its freedom. Oh, beautiful gospel of power and life, beautiful treasures unfolding. Rosetta, like many of her Shaker sisters and brothers, labored for the gift of song. Often that laboring was rewarded, but not always. Brother Alonzo Hollister of Mount Lebanon noted this story of Rosetta's failure to get a song. Quote, Eldress Caroline Witcher in the church at Enfield, New Hampshire, asked Sister Rosetta Cummings to compose a song for this scripture. Naught that defileth or maketh a lie within thy courts shall enter. Sister Rosetta did not succeed in getting the gift and returned the gift to Eldress Caroline. Eldress Caroline, feeling anxious for the song, sent her away to try again, but she failed to get it. Sister Isabella Russell was living with Eldest Caroline, and without knowing her desire in this matter, received the song one day while Eldest Caroline was absent from their room. When she returned, Isabella sang her the song. Eldest Caroline was much pleased, for it exactly suited her need.
Although we're talking about Rosetta today, we need to remember that the Shakers were a communal society, and as capable and dedicated as Rosetta was, throughout her life, she worked closely with other members of the community. Marianne's just told us a lovely story about Caroline, her friend Caroline Witcher, and her request for a song. Caroline was 20 years Rosetta's senior, and there's no doubt that she was a mentor and a teacher to Rosetta. Caroline was recognized as a very astute businesswoman and had been in the office as trustee for quite some time when she died, and Rosetta took over for her. But throughout their lives, they sort of traded jobs. They were elders and or trustee in the church family, and Caroline had a huge influence on Rosetta's abilities as a leader here. Another very close associate of Rosetta's was Mariella Briggs. Mariella was younger than Rosetta, and Rosetta was probably a mentor to her. She was named caretaker of the girls and became a devoted spiritual leader for the young people here in the church family. Ella was also a singer, a hymn writer, and a member of the community's Shaker Quartet. Although Mariella lived to be 60 years old, this is the only image that we know of her. So she's one of those people that's sort of forever young in your memory. And when she died, it was such a tragedy for the community and for Rosetta personally, that when Rosetta wrote to another sister to express her grief over Ella's death, she said, quote, "But my dear, you will realize how truly great and deep is our sorrow, that we may never, never again see her in the accustomed places and meet her as I have for the past 50 years. It leaves an awful space that nothing nor nobody can fill." End quote. Henrietta Spooner was not necessarily as close a personal friend to Rosetta as maybe Caroline and Ella were, but she worked alongside Rosetta in the office as a trustee for many, many years. Henrietta had been a nurse in the infirmary, but she was appointed trustee along with Rosetta in 1902 when Caroline Witcher died. And from then on, her name appears on business cards, bill heads, and in advertising, along with Rosetta's, and they had great responsibility for the livelihood of the village. From what we understand, Henrietta was quite a saleswoman as well, and she spent a lot of time in the community and traveling around drumming up business for Shaker products. And last but certainly not least, Fanny Fallon. Fanny came here as a child, spent most of her life as a school teacher in the church family. In fact, she taught for 31 years, and she was a longtime girls' house caretaker. Once she retired from teaching, she became one of Rosetta's most important supporters, and she was there during the long and arduous work of selling out and relocating to Canterbury. And then she and Rosetta moved to Canterbury together in 1923 and shared a room in Enfield House for the next several years.
In 1879, at the age of 34, Sister Rosetta Cummings was appointed an Eldress of Enfield's church family. For nearly a decade, she had been serving in the Elders Order at the North Family or Gathering Order. First as an associate Eldress and then as first Eldress, she shared responsibilities with her brother, Henry Cummings. He served as both first trustee and first elder of the family. He was also the public preacher for the society, So he had a far more prominent profile than his younger sibling. Nonetheless, her years of experience helping to guide the spiritual development of those young believers just coming into the faith were invaluable in preparing her for the challenges she would face as first eldress at the church. She was fortunate in being able to share those responsibilities and challenges with a seasoned, experienced, spiritually anchored first elder, Abraham Perkins. One of Shakerism's founding parents, Father James Whitaker, taught believers, quote, "You have received faith, and your faith will be tried. Faith that is untried is uncertain." Fortunately, Rosetta had a deep and abiding trust in her Shaker faith. But as Father James warned, it would be tried. In the first 2 years of her eldership, the spiritual strength of the community was challenged on 2 fronts. First, by a legal decision of the courts in a case that stemmed from the murder of trustee Caleb Dyer. It was an opportunistic claim against the Shakers that was based on forged records and duplicitous testimony. Nonetheless, the community found itself responsible for a $20,000 obligation to former business partners in the Shaker Woolen Mill. The financial burden this imposed on the community weakened the faith of some and required the wisdom of its leaders to strengthen the resolve of the faithful that this injustice would not defeat them. The second blow came in 1881 with the apostasy of Rosetta's brother, Henry. Again, feelings of betrayal, but this time by the very person who had been a gatherer of converts to the faith. His apostasy demanded spiritual work by the community, led by their elders, of soul searching, acceptance, forgiveness, and a willingness to hold on to the faith, even as a loved and trusted leader fell away. Perhaps part of Eldress Rosetta's ministry to her community during that time made use of a song she had received in 1869. Oh, pray for each other when my heart is bound in prayer, for each sister and each brother. Oh, breathe an earnest prayer. And more than this I say, pray, fervently pray, for those who despitefully use you. Our Father above, in his mercy and love, forgive them, they know not what they do. During 20 years as eldress of the family, Rosetta was a quiet but powerful force for building up Enfield's sisterhood, even as the membership on the brothers' side declined precipitously. Through the last decades of the 19th century, she nurtured a community of sisters strong in their faith and insistent that Shakerism had much to offer the world if it would only listen. Under Rosetta's guidance, the sisters did the work of bringing children and young people into the family, despite knowing that few of them would stay past early adulthood. They looked with hope for a spiritual revival, even as it fell to Eldress Rosetta and an aging elder Abram Perkins to close the second or South family and make two separate families into one stronger one.
Beverly Gordon says in her book, Shaker Textile Arts, knitting was an integral part of the lives of the sisters throughout Shaker history. They knitted all of the community members' socks, stockings, gloves, and mittens, and most of their undergarments, and they made many of these items for sale, end quote. Little girls were taught to knit at a very young age and were expected to fill their spare moments knitting or sewing. It's likely that Rosetta learned to knit while living in the girls' house under the tutelage of Charlotte Hart. There's ample evidence in her diaries and correspondence that she continued to knit throughout her life. Although the Enfield Shakers were early adopters of the newly invented circular knitting machines, which allowed them to become leaders in the manufacture of seamless hosiery, the machine knit only a ribbed tube for the sock body, but the Shaker sisters hand knit the heel and toe. There is not any doubt that Rosetta would have been involved in supporting this industry, both as a knitter and in her role as a trustee in finding places to sell Shaker socks. On the left is an image of Rosetta taken by John Tarbell about 1907. And I particularly love this image because not only is she knitting, which is a personal favorite of mine, but she seems to be really enjoying herself. And many of the images that we see of Rosetta, she doesn't smile, although I don't believe that she was a dour person. I just don't think she smiled much for the camera. In the middle of this screen is an ad from 1874. It was in the Christian Watchman in Boston, Massachusetts, for a company that was offering real Enfield hand knit Shaker socks. And what we don't know is, were these really real Enfield hand knit Shaker socks, or were they just trying to make people believe that? Although what we do get is an indication of the importance or the quality that was expected from real Enfield hand knit socks. On the right is a pair of silk gloves that I'd like to read from a letter that Rosetta wrote, dated December 15th, 1924. Quote, I came across the other day a pair of white silk gloves. These were handwork with the thread from which the gloves were knit. It was spun from the raw silk and twisted into the thread, and the knitting all done by the sisters at Enfield 60 or more years ago. I wanted to give them to someone whom I thought would appreciate the hand labor, and all so neatly done. The initials marked on them were of the sister who gave them to me, not the one who made them, as different sisters did different parts of the work in making them. I have never worn them myself, and I wanted someone to have them who would like to see them and know about them, even if they did not care to wear them. They represent a deal of hand labor, and it is real nicely done, end quote. This was a letter written to Huldah Wayman, a friend of Rosetta's, who was not a Shaker, but who Rosetta trusted to take care of this treasured possession of hers. At first, all knitting was done by hand, and if you've seen any early Shaker hand knitting, you know the quality and the fineness of the work. Shaker sisters knit with knitting pins, which were even smaller than contemporary US size 000 knitting needles. What you see in this image on the left is a pair of size 3, current contemporary size 3 knitting needles. I just knit a pair of socks with size 3 needles. It took me about 2.5 weeks to knit them. The next needle over is a size 000 and the cuff of a hand knit Shaker sock. I mention all this because the words on the right-hand side were from Rosetta's 1924 diary that she kept at Canterbury. And this is a list of the socks that she and Fannie Fallon were knitting to support the community there. The important thing to note is that it starts on April 15th of 1924, and by October 20th, the two of them had knit 27 pair of socks on 000 needles. Any of you who knit will know that knitting 27 pair of socks in 6 months on 000 needles is an amazing feat.
In 1902, Rosetta's co-worker in the faith, trustee Carolyn Witcher, died, and Eldress Rosetta was needed to fill her shoes, as maintaining financial viability was the most pressing issue confronting the community. Trustee John Bradford had, since 1881, been doing what he could to meet the community's still crippling debt obligations by selling Shaker land, buildings, and unneeded assets for cash. But increasingly, it was revenue from sisters' work that paid the bills, bought the paint, and kept the family afloat. Writing to a friend in 1904, Rosetta wrote, quote, "We've been very busy through the summer, and even now that summer has passed, we find plenty to busy heart, head, and hand. We wish some benevolently inclined persons who were fortunate possessors of millions would be impressed to bestow upon us a few $1,000, the reception of which in this time of straitened circumstances would make us very happy indeed. There's no harm in wishing anyway." End quote. Trustees Rosetta and Henrietta Spooner coordinated the sisters' efforts as they continued to generate high-quality fancy articles, sweaters, cloaks, and food products, and marketed them at fairs and hotels. They made sales from their trustees' office store and consigned merchandise to local merchants. They opened their home to summer visitors, offering home-cooked meals and tours of the property for a fee. The work united the sisterhood, but it also wearied them. Writing to Eldress Catherine Allen in 1912, Sister Rosetta noted, quote, "I agree with you that much we give our time to is just the following out of habitual ruts. And sometimes we might question who would ever be made better by all this routine, either temporal or spiritual. But our homes are so expensive, so many steps to do, that time and strength are quickly expended." End quote. In 1913, the Gathering Order, or North Family, was closed, and a few of the young people moved to Mount Lebanon with Sister Martha Wetherell. In a letter to Marianne Carroll, a girl who'd been raised at Enfield, Rosetta allowed herself a moment of sadness as she considered the realities of the family's dwindling community. Quote, "Did you see in the papers that we'd all moved from Enfield to Mount Lebanon? Well, we have not. Martha Wetherell, with 2 or 3 girls from the North family, did go there last April. Only Eldress Ann and a girl are now left at the North family. We're thinking strongly of all going there, if we could get a good sale for this place. The size of the place is much better adapted to our present numbers than this large farm and so many large unoccupied buildings. I wish we had the interest and help of a few of our absent girls. Don't you sometimes wish so too? Well, I've written quite a sheet full, but it is filled with loving interest and prayer for you. Remember always, you are the child of many soulful prayers. and you are God's child. Only room to say I love you. As ever, your friend, Sister Rosetta. Over a century, the Enfield Shaker community had amassed a large property that was becoming an overwhelming burden for the aging sisterhood. Buildings were sold and moved off the property to give them new usefulness elsewhere and to reduce the community's tax burden. Farm equipment, animals, and buildings full of furniture and the stuff of living needed to be sorted, discarded, sold, or sent to Canterbury. Much of this work could be managed by the sisters, but they did not have the needed knowledge or experience to deal with more complex legal and tax issues. Such matters required the assistance of Canterbury trustees Arthur Bruce and Irving Greenwood. In 1913, they formally took over trusteeship of Enfield. That eased Rosetta's workload, but not by much. In 1917, the first group of Enfield sisters moved to Canterbury. In 1921, Rosetta celebrated her 80th birthday, and the editor of the local paper wrote, "Our congratulations, gifts, and other remembrances in honor of her birthday are but slight testimonial of the esteem in which she is held. Rosetta Cummings is remarkably active for a lady of 80 years and is deeply interested in the events of the present day." Later that year, Canterbury sister Jessie Evans came to help out at Enfield and wrote, quote, "Sister Rosetta is not very strong, but she's holding the little home together. And that is what mothers are made for." Sister Rosetta Cummings came to Enfield in the 1840s, when the community was at the height of its physical and spiritual prosperity. She embraced Shakerism in its fullness, nurtured it with wise, compassionate leadership for nearly half a century. And in 1923, when holding the little home together was no longer an option, she closed her beloved community and joined her Enfield Shaker sisters at Canterbury.
Rosetta kept a daily diary from probably for most of her life. Many of them we don't have anymore, but there are two left. And one of them is from the year 1925, when she had moved to Canterbury. In the middle of the month of November of 1925, the handwriting changes from Rosetta's handwriting to Fanny Fallon's handwriting. And Fanny writes on Thursday, November 12, 1925. "Rosetta leaves us this morning while in her sleep, passed out without suffering. Tuesday, November 17. Am lonely, have been sauntering about in the rooms here. 'Tis hard to disturb things. Wednesday, November 18. Cleaning some in our sleeping room. Thursday, November 19. Cleaning in sleeping room, cannot hurry. Friday, November 20. Finish in sleeping room and come back to sleep alone tonight. Sleep well. Oh, but I miss Sister Rosetta." Thank you.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Marianne and Carolyn. You guys did a wonderful job. That was a great and very informative presentation on this very important figure in Enfield Shaker history. I'd like to invite participants, anybody who would like one of their questions answered, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A function. And Marianne and Carolyn, I'm sure, are more than happy to answer those questions. I have one to start. It's sort of kind of a local question, but I think it raises a bigger question about ancestry in the Shaker order. So Susan Brown writes, is Fire Chief Fred Cummings a descendant? I would ask the question is, are there any Cummings descendants in the area or even beyond the area that we're aware of?
Well, I think because all the Cummings children came here, and most of them didn't marry or married very late in life, there weren't very many Cummings descendants. Enoch and Juliet had 2 sons. It's a very unusual story, but after Enoch had died a number of years, the 2 brothers committed suicide, not together, but on the same day. They were in different locations. And there was a letter that one of them left that said they were worried that Enoch evidently had developed a terrible epilepsy at the end of his life, and they were worried that was going to happen to them. I don't know that that was really the reason, but anyway, so his 2 sons committed suicide. Now, I think each of them had 1 or 2 children, but I haven't followed the genealogy after them. So I don't believe there are any descendants around here. If there are any, they're probably in Michigan, which is where Enoch settled. Marianne, maybe you have some other information.
No, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to say, since Carolyn was giving me credit for all the research, that this was information that she was able to find in public sources. Over the years, we kind of divided our efforts, and I've stayed primarily in the Shaker manuscripts and Shaker documentation, and Carolyn has ventured out into the great world of newspaper archives, census records, and genealogy resources through Ancestry or the Mormons site. And what has really been the most wonderful about doing this research is having a partner in obsession. And
yeah, we're both nuts.
most people don't really care if we find a little article in the newspaper or some little bit of information relating to the Enfield Shakers. And so we're really happy to have somebody else to get excited with. I don't have anything to add to the information that you uncovered about the rather unhappy end of the Enoch Cummings family.
So we have a couple more great questions. So we have one that's, was the transfer of the trusteeship to Canterbury in 1913 a mutually agreed upon decision, or were there disputes over that?
I suspect that there was a sense of relief. There's no question from some correspondence that we know of between Rosetta Cummings and lawyers who had worked for the Shakers under one of their farm managers, Mr. Manning, that she could not make head or tail of. The sisters were given status of trustee, but that did not instantly provide them with the kind of legal background and to deal with contracts, with lawsuits against the society as the community weakened in numbers. There were people who were happy to take advantage of the situation, and so it was important that Arthur and Irving Greenwood were helped. At first, they just came as advisors, and then I think they just felt we're just going to need to take this over. That was that was a difficulty, I would imagine, for the sisters who prided themselves on their ability to manage even in these difficult times.
So another question, this one's from Nancy Osgood. She says, could you speak about how the women were dressed? Did I see some handmade cloaks and of course indoor bonnets? Did the way Rosetta dressing indicate her role in the society?
I think at one time there was talk about if there was fringe, and I think perhaps Mr. Levitt got us going on this thought that if the Bertha collars had fringe, that indicated the status of either trustee or eldress. And as nearly as we can tell from surviving photographs, that has no basis in reality.
I think what the sisters wore changed slightly through the years. In most of the photographs, you saw them wearing Bertha collars instead of the silk kerchiefs. But I've never seen anything that indicated a level of leadership over anybody else. You see the same outfits on sisters of the rank and file, and also leadership. I don't have the image in this particular show, but there's an image of 7 Enfield sisters taken probably very early 20th century. And some of the younger sisters are wearing literally exactly the same outfit as Rosetta is wearing, and she's in her 80s and clearly has a position of leadership. I think there wasn't a differentiation. Marianne and I just had a conversation yesterday because although I've never seen an image of Rosetta without a white cap on, there was a time when the lead ministry at Mount Lebanon said that the sisters didn't have to wear caps anymore. And we do have images of different sisters who chose not to wear a cap after that time, although certainly Rosetta and Fanny and Henrietta, Carolyn, I never have seen any images of them without a white cap. And they did have winter bonnets and summer bonnets. The summer bonnets were more like straw hats, and the winter bonnets often had a wool covering over them or even silk. I don't know if that answers your question, Nancy, but.
There seemed to be quite a bit of discretion. We have some folks at the second family who have silk scarves draped over their prayer covering, and it seems like there was a bit of discretion, but it did not seem to be linked to positions of authority.
Right. So if you, on the Enfield Shaker website, Enfield Shaker Museum website, if you go to Shaker Portraits, we have more than 60 portraits of Enfield Shakers up on the website. And what you'll note is just what Marianne was talking about, that some of the sisters have just a white net cap on, others have these fairly elaborate scarves or shawls over their heads. Many of them are wearing hand knit shawls that are quite decorative. And we don't have this image up on the website, but we do have a full body CDV of one of the sisters, Marianne Curtis, who was at the South family. And clearly she joined as an adult, because when you do a close-up of her, she has pierced ears and she's wearing gold or silver hoops. And in one of her CDVs, she's wearing fingerless lace gloves, a plaid silk scarf with a brooch in the middle of it. So yeah, I guess at different times, depending on where you lived and who you were, you got to wear different things. They weren't quite as plain as many people would have you believe.
So let's move on to our next question. So Scott DeWolf said that you both spent decades studying Shaker life. What area of Shaker research would you like to see explored more?
Oh, wow.
It's a big question. I know.
So Scott, my latest obsession is dating CDVs. Maybe because we spend so much time putting the CDVs up on the website, I've been looking at them a lot, and it's interesting to me that so few of them have actual dates on them, and it's difficult sometimes to determine the age of the individuals. And so the whole, for me, part of it is just the trying to figure out when the Shakers, particularly in Enfield, 'cause that's what I'm most familiar with, when did they start all of this formal photography? And was it just the leadership who got to go in the beginning, or did everybody get to go? And there are just a lot of things related to the whole photography end of things. And I know, Scott, you've spent your life looking at Shaker ephemera and photography, so maybe you could be helpful.
As far as I'm concerned, I appreciate the fact that more and more Shaker research, Shaker scholarship is being linked to issues that confront the world's people, as well as just a sort of insular look at Shaker life. Obviously, the more that we can know about the details of Shaker life, the more thoughtfully and intelligently we can relate that history to bigger issues that confronted the entire country, and also allow us to look at what does Shakerism offer in an ongoing and continuing way to the exploration of our humanity, our spirituality, our political issues, and choices about ways of life, about how to preserve our planet. And I think that as we look honestly at Shaker history, we can relate it to those many issues without doing these phony glosses that suggest that everything the Shakers did was responsible and positive.
So the next question is from Charlie, Marianne, and he asks, will you say something about the sayings of Sister Rosetta?
Oh. Yeah, we were going to.
Yeah, we were going to do that, weren't we?
Forgot. We've compiled a list of sort of short sayings that were taken from one of Rosetta Cummings' notebooks that reflect her teaching, her sensibility, her modesty, but also her very strong belief that life is complex, humanity is complex, and we need to look honestly at ourselves, at our failings, and also to celebrate life. I'll have to, let's see if I can remember. I know that one of them is it's not the burst at the start, but the unwavering, unfailing pursuit that wins the day, or something like that. But maybe I should run and grab some of her sayings while you talk, Carolyn, and then I could read you a few.
Well, so Marianne, why don't you keep answering questions, because I'm closest to the store and I can grab that for you.
Okay, or there's one. Okay.
What?
All right.
There's one where?
In my bag in the Cummings folder in the front pouch.
Okay. All right, I'll see if I can find it.
Okay.
Okay, so the next question. Yeah. So the next question is from Michael and Susan Thomas. It's, would Rosetta's communication with the wider Enfield community have been mostly business related? Did the Enfield Shakers participate in any broader community activities or events?
Yes, Rosetta had many neighborly connections and friendships in Enfield. In fact, when Irving Greenwood comes to pick her up to take her for the last time from Enfield to Canterbury, he notes that before they left, he needed to take her around to say her goodbyes to many of her close friends. People continued to visit her from Enfield when she lived for the 2 years that she lived at Canterbury. And there's also correspondence and postcards that indicate her ongoing friendships with and love of people from Enfield. In the latter, last 20 years in the society, there was just almost constant contact with the world, either for business, but also people were invited in to the community for lectures. They did little programs where they invited folks in to visit and to enjoy things that the Shakers could offer. They also went out to preach at spiritualist meetings and other revival efforts in the larger community. So there was a great deal of contact with the world's people in her last 20 years, I would say, at Enfield.
So we have one other question. Beth Hansen writes, do you have a sense of the relationship between Rosetta and her brother Henry at the time he departed and afterwards?
Perhaps the most, there are no written records that I'm aware of their sorrow and disappointment. As Carolyn mentioned, there is a family reunion. Henry Cummings was able to come back into the community, mostly to visit with brothers that he had lived with and known. But in Marguerite Melcher's book, her history of Shakerism, she speaks a little bit about that issue. She had relatives who lived at the end in Enfield Center, and two of her aunt and uncle lived at Enfield, and her grandmother, I guess, was a sibling who had never joined the Shakers. But so she had some sort of firsthand access to people's feelings and theories. And she suggests that the community always hoped that Henry would decide he'd made a big mistake and would come back. And they also blamed this younger sister, Arabella Churchill, who had not been at the North family that long and was a woman who was divorced. And they speculated in the Smith family household, at any rate, that she'd really joined the Shakers to get Henry to capture him. We have absolutely no basis for knowing whether that was true, but that was certainly the feeling of some people pretty closely connected with the family. What we do think is that they hope desperately that he would repent of his decision and come back into community.
So I'm just about to post this for everybody. We have Shaker sayings up on our website, so I'm going to post that link now, so everybody has that. And we just got another question in. Hold on one second, I just have to scroll up here. So the question was, were the sisters selling their socks and gloves to outsiders at the village, or were they making them specifically for the members?
They were doing both, actually. I'm sure throughout the history of the Shaker community here, the sisters were responsible for making, knitting, sewing, different articles of clothing for both the brothers and the sisters. There would have been tailors who were tailoring the brothers' clothing, but they started, I think, very early on selling their wares, handmade wares, in their own store, which would have been in the trustee's office. But also, as I said, they were leaders in manufacturing knit items, sweaters and socks, that by machine. They would do part of the knitting on machines and then hand finish them. So like the Shaker sweaters that the Shaker sisters sold here, they weren't hand knitting sweaters from the ribbing up. They had knitting machines eventually, and they would knit the flat parts, and then they would stitch them together and hand knit the collars and the cuffs. And then eventually, just like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, the word Shaker attached to a knit garment increased its value significantly. So even though they were selling their products on the market, all kinds of people started manufacturing Shaker sweaters and Shaker socks. But they made product for sale and for their own use.
Here are a couple of Eldress Rosetta's words to the wise. If religion has done nothing for your temper, it has done nothing for your soul. The truths we least wish to hear are those which it is most to our advantage to know. No man or woman is indispensable. The world is not made on that plan. Therefore, the busiest person may pause to breathe and so be able to live longer and work harder. In any community fitly joined together, there must be many who are inconspicuous, but who form the solid substance without which the wholesome community could not exist. To be a person of that sort is worthy of one's ambition. Never mind where you work, care more about how you work. If you have less to do with being, you have less to do with being successful than with being faithful. It is not the spurt at the start, but the continued, unresting, unhastening advance that wins the day.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody has a question, please feel free to post it in the chat or the Q&A. And if I don't see anything else, just so everybody knows, I just posted a link to an article that Marianne wrote on the impact of Shakerism on the family of Edward T. Cummings. So that link is also in the chat. And I think if I don't see anything else, I think we're all set for today. I'd like to thank Marianne and Carolyn for a wonderful presentation and for taking the time to do this. I'd like to thank all of you for attending. And if any of you have any questions about the Enfield Shakers, or you'd like to learn more about the Enfield Shakers, please visit our website, shakermuseum.org, and you can add in the Shaker-studies, and you'll get all kinds of different options and things that I think you'll find interesting, like Shaker recipes, sayings, portraits, and biographies. Once again, thank you. And on your way out, Zoom is going to ask you to answer a few question poll. We use this information to try to improve these programs so we can do more and do a better job in the future. Thank you all.